Welcome to Build a Business Worth Buying, the podcast where seasoned entrepreneurs, M&A experts, and world-class operators share behind-the-scenes stories of building, scaling, and selling remarkable businesses. I'm your host, Aaron Alpeter, and every week I sit down with people shaping the world of acquisitions, founders who cashed out, buyers with bold strategies, and advisors who help make deals happen. This is not a podcast for beginners. It's for those who know the grind and want actionable insights to make their next big move. Get ready to take notes, rethink your strategy, and hear untold stories of what it takes to build a business worth buying. Today's guest is someone who's spent his entire career making large, complicated systems work while lowering costs. So Holger Carlsson spent more than 24 years in procurement and supply chain at IKEA. He went to the United Nations. As chief of section at the Department of Operational Support, he introduced category management and created a supply chain operational guidance to align processes and shorten delivery lead times. Holger's had a remarkable career, and it's really a study in how smart systems, clear constraints, and disciplined decision-making create resilience at any size. And that's really why I wanted him on the show. The lessons that helped shape IKEA and help IKEA scale were the ones that he brought over to the UN and helped them understand how they can respond to pressure, are really the same lessons that founders can use to build businesses that don't grow when they break. And so I was really excited for this episode. And Holger, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being on Build a Business Worth Buying.
Aaron, thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, if anybody knows anything about me, I lived in Sweden. I'm a huge Swedish fan. And you are Swedish. And so you obviously spent time in IKEA. So vi kommer att köra på svenska på den här podcasten.
Ja, det blir spännande för alla som inte pratar svenska.
Yeah. So the first saken som vi kommer att prata om, no, never mind.
Yeah.
So we did joke about that. That would have been really fun for me, and I think Holger would have gotten through it. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You've worked inside two of the most complex procurement ecosystems on the planet. When you strip away all of the scale, what's the core operating philosophy that drove good decision making at IKEA as well as the UN?
In the name of the IKEA concept is to be a production-oriented retailer. That's it. It's three words. So with that, you actually get the sense of what the operational reality is. You won't trust any idea until you make sure that it actually works in production. And then and only then will you go to the market with it. So I think that is ingrained in how IKEA is wired from the get-go. And that's back in the 40s when it was created, and it just scaled from there. If you jump over to UN, it's a little bit or much more complicated because now you have 193 shareholders. Each of the member states have, at least on paper, an equal say in what the UN should do. And obviously you're guided also from the beginning of the 40s. These are 280 plus year organizations. You're guided by the Declaration of Human Rights. So that should give you the basics of how you're supposed to operate. But then instead of making profit and grow and gain market shares, the UN operations is all focused on providing operational ability for all the different field missions and offices around the world. And that in itself means that some things need to move much faster when there is a crisis. But when it comes to regulations to follow for operational guidance, it takes much more time because it's so siloed and there are so many regulations and protocols to take into account, and that can delay that quick process. It's a little bit contrary.
What are the most important constraints that you would use when you were designing an IKEA system versus the UN?
For IKEA, I was at one point pushing to be in charge of finding new factories in Spain. The reason for that was that I was running the French office and the French didn't really like Spain. So I said, okay, I go. So I found a lot of good factories down there at the end of the 90s. The problem was that the IKEA system, when it came to transport calculation, was based on a 12-month history. And since we hardly bought anything at all in Spain, the cubic meter cost was ballpark 500 euros, which meant that basically nothing was competitive landed Germany, which was the biggest market at that time. So I said, this is useless. We have great factories. We can't move them outside the Excel sheet because of that problem with the transport costs. So I made a deal. At that time, it was a little bit more free than it is today because IKEA has grown. But I made a deal with the global transport managers. Listen, we're not going to buy anything in Spain unless you and I make an agreement. Let's put the transport cost at a fifth of that, like ballpark 75 euro per cubic meter. I said, but that's not true. Well, so it will be true. Let's put it in there and see what happens after 12 months. Because at least then we are competitive and we're going to get some business. And if we don't build the volume through that business, my bad, my mistake. I created a constraint that didn't work and we put it back at 500. But if I'm right, or wherever we are between those 2 points, we adjust accordingly. And he agreed to that, which was great because now suddenly we were competitive and we started about 10, 15 factories within 18 months and showed that the volume actually brought it up to maybe 100, 120 euros per cubic meter, but not 500. And that was a way for us to create that constraint and then move past that by having a belief in the future. So that was the one that we deliberately created to temporarily flaw the system, but merge it with honesty after 12 months. The other one I wanted to bring in was kind of interesting because everybody said, packages are damaged. So yeah, but how much? It's almost nothing. It's 0.0 something percent. So okay, let's have a look. So I went out to all the closest stores and warehouses and said, that's too low. I think it's 1/3. So no, you're kidding me. We have KPIs. It's 0.5. So we brought our people and we checked. We were 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, and every third damn pallet had non-compliances, anywhere between not being compliant to be completely damaged. So what we introduced and realized why this happened, because that damage was brought all the way to the customer. And the reason why that happened was that people said, doesn't look too bad, versus you shall not pass. So why did that thou shall not pass not happen? Well, first of all, the packaging instruction was 90 pages. Nobody reads that. So okay, that needed to be fixed. The other one is, to a store claim to be made took 40 minutes. Productivity was not measured net productivity, it was gross productivity. So whatever you could move through per hour in cubic meters, you win. And that meant that nobody really cared if the package was damaged, because anyway, somebody downstream will take care of it. And in this case, it became the customer. And that's a really, really bad policy for a quality message. When you did those claims, about 95% of those were rejected by the wholesaler. Oh, it can't be true. It wasn't that bad. No, I'm not going to pay you. So we put in 2 constraints. One, it can never take more than maximum 10 minutes to make a claim. And good news for you guys in wholesale, you don't have to approve anything anymore. We're going to hardwire the approval 100%. Every store claim auto-approved. So of course the claims skyrocketed because now the store saw this as a cash cow. So those 2 constraints actually at the end led to a new position called gatekeeper. This is 10 years ago, and we have gatekeepers in every single store in IKEA worldwide today, still saving hundreds of thousands per year. Total, it gave about $200 million per year, and it gave a revenue increase by 4% because of the quality image in every store. And I met one girl, and I asked the girl, how is it to be a gatekeeper? This is a new position, IKEA. So, are you kidding me? This is the coolest job in the company. I have the mandate to stop everything that's not compliant. And what we did with that, every country then, of course, is different. So China said we need a small one because everybody carries it in the pocket. And when I went there, they all signed. We commit to be gatekeepers. And I think this, my Chinese is much worse than your Swedish, means nothing that is not compliant moves on to the next step. And they were all committed to it. The Italians said we have bigger pockets. We need it plastified and in Italian and show the pictures what is okay and not okay. In India, they put it on the wall. So the message on that constraint was this blew out to full-blown process within the supply chain to ensure that only compliant quality goes all the way through from factory to customer's home. So I think that is something that small companies also can relate to and build in from the beginning instead of having to fix it afterwards.
I love both of those examples because you were intentional about recognizing what was an artificial constraint that was there and said, let's just move the goalpost. Yeah. Or you went about saying, let's actually create a constraint. And so I'd love to learn a little bit more about that from your perspective. How should a business be thinking about either identifying constraints that are artificial or actually going through and creating a constraint to give you the output you want, even though you know that's going to be some pain in the short term?
The answer to that is yes. You should do both. Don't be afraid of spending 3 times more time than you planned before you get going with your new business. Everything that possibly could go wrong would go wrong, could go wrong. So why don't you plan for it? It doesn't cost anything in the beginning. It's going to be very expensive if you wait with that analysis until you're already up and running. So I would construct both of those. And another thing I would do is when you look at the processes, don't look only at each process by itself, because the biggest gain you have is probably in the handovers. And that's the UN example I had, because we were charged to bring down a Deloitte analysis because nobody understood the Deloitte blueprint. So I had a very small team. We picked 3 pilot locations. And we went down there to write it on the ground, because that's where actually the work is going to happen. So what we found out was that, for example, you have armored vehicles to protect the convoys bringing fuel and food from territories with insurgents shooting at them. And 4 of those AGVs were at the workshop waiting for spare parts. They flew in the spare parts from Canada via the airport in Entebbe, came to Bamako, and 4 weeks later, they were still not in the workshop. It's like, you paid for air shipment. Where are the damn spare parts? So we went back step by step, who is in charge of what, and where are the handovers? And it turned out that the guys responsible for goods receipt didn't have access to the transport module in the computer system. So we went to the transport guys and said, well, how long would it take you to make sure that the good people at goods receipt knows that the goods is here? So, well, it's going to take about 30-35 minutes. That's excellent. We're all going to go have a cup of coffee. When we come back, we see what happened. We came back and I told the guys from goods receipt, can you see where the spare parts are? Yes, now we can see. It's the first time in years we have seen that. It's excellent. Where is it? Well, it's in container number 42. Okay, let's get that. Yeah, but that was weeks ago. Now it's blocked by other containers. I said, okay. So what do you need to do? Well, we need to move those other containers. Good, do that. Well, it's going to take a few hours. We're going to go and have lunch. We're going to come back. And this whole thing just walked down until he stood there with the container he didn't know was on the backyard for a couple of weeks. With the seal broken. Here's the papers. Can you sign off the custody of the goods? Yes. And that same afternoon, the spare parts were at the workshop. And what the story of that constraint tells us was hardwire the handovers. Every single way from the raw material in the supply chain all the way to the end user. So we put that as the flow chart and the process in the new operational guidance. And then we went process by process by process all the way.
When you think about just constraints generally, which constraints are the most impactful in a business? The ones that are external or the ones that are internal?
I think they are equally important. And obviously this differs from services to products to raw materials to what kind of complexity, from food to medical devices and so forth. But what I think that people very often make a mistake in the analysis when it comes to the external constraints is that they say, why would I bother about it? Because I cannot do anything about it. But that's not the point. The same for risk management. If you can't mitigate the risk, mitigate the consequences of the risk. Same thing with the external constraints. You can't mitigate that specific constraint or optimize it, but you can do everything possible about the consequences of it. And I think this is what every business have to take into account. Write down every single little piece of what goes into your business. And if you think you missed something, talk to 2-3 people, not more, 2-3 people, and ask them, what have I missed? Let them give you all that input and write everything down. Don't ask for a system to do it for you. Do it yourself, pen and paper, or worst case, keyboard and Word. But write it down before you even attempt to get any system. And that way you're going to be able to flush out where those different constraints are. And you can now start to already, before you start your business, figuring out how you're going to mitigate them.
Well, I imagine doing that exercise really, you'll find things that, oh, this is unnecessarily complicated, like your handover example. And, I think a big part of a leader and a big part of growing business is actually making it more simple over time. When it comes to this idea of simplification, why is that so hard?
I think it's hard because you have too many people involved with too many opinions. The kill your darlings is absolutely front and center. You have to kill your darlings because you don't need as much as you think you do. With a few factories in Spain, day one, they put a yellow sticker on everything that people said, I haven't used this thing for the last week. And overnight you remove those things. And next day people go with much more space than they ever had before, and the production is much more efficient. And you realize that all those key elements that we thought we needed, we didn't. I was brought in the first time to UN in 2017 to introduce category management. And for me, one of the key category management is range management, right? What is the assortment that we need? I had a conversation with the logistics support division, who were in charge of all the statement of work, all the SOWs. And procurement was responsible to buy everything that was in the SOWs. And this team said, we are not happy because procurement always goes out and buy whatever, and we are in charge of creating the SOWs. We don't have any power. It's like, wait a minute, you are in charge of designing what they should buy. You have all the damn power in the world. And once we started to get that perspective going, it's like, okay, we can actually do much more than we thought we did, depending on how we define, how we describe, how we develop those SOWs. This head nurse was in charge of the SOW for the medical devices. So we looked at it. It was 2,300 SKUs. And the problem with that was that very few suppliers in the world was able to deliver even an offer and bid on that wide assortment of SKUs. And one of the things that caught my eye was 15 syringes, 15 different thicknesses. So I said, how many do we need? They said, well, we should ask all the missions. I said, why would we ask all the missions? Can you give me the 3 best field surgeons we have in the organization? Let's bring them in. That's our reference group. And we asked all of these surgeons, how many needle thicknesses do you need? And all of them came back, 3. So why don't you need more? Well, with the injuries we are treating here, that's all we need. We don't have not plastic surgeons. We are putting people together. 3 is enough. So 12 syringes out of the assortment. And we went piece by piece in that. And the other things were there because they were there. They will always been there before. And that's why people kept them in there. So people are afraid of that simplicity because they think they're going to lose something. And to round that up, IKEA did the same journey. We need more articles because people don't see enough news. At that time, IKEA had about 25,000, 30,000 on some markets articles. They went down to below 9,000. That was the core range. And people were afraid. Many people are afraid like hell. It's like, we're going to crash because people are not going to treat us as novelty anymore. And the opposite happened. People suddenly came back and said, you have so many news in the catalog this year. And the only reason why they thought that was that the clutter was gone. Suddenly each of these news had an ample space to be shown. And you also grew the possibility for a much more competitive product price because now much more vendors were able to bid on it because there were fewer, you had all the leverage or the volume benefit to that. So I think that one of the reasons why simplicity doesn't work is you have too many people involved, too many people with opinions rather than knowledge, and that some people that are involved are just hanging on to history or their own beliefs.
Yeah, you've touched on so many good points with that. Oftentimes when you are undertaking this big transformation, whether it's SKU rationalization or it is trying to figure out how many syringes we should actually have, the natural bias is say, let's get consensus, let's talk to everybody, right? And what you shared in those examples was, no, you just need 2 or 3 people who are really well versed in that. And it seems like that's a good principle to strike the right balance of getting it mostly right and then also moving it very quickly. Because I imagine when you brought those field surgeons in, it was a day they came in and you chatted, as opposed to probably several months worth of getting people to buy in. What have you found when it comes to that in terms of what's the right density when it comes to having decision makers in the same room?
3, maximum 5. And you always want the one who says yes to everything, and you want the one who says no to everything. So that's the key, 3 to 5. When it comes to end-to-end processes, you need 1 for each. You need 1 from manufacturing, 1 from product development, 1 from logistics, different logistics. You need a last mile, you need a warehouse management, you need a transportation, someone from customs. If one of them can cover that, that's great. But you need the entire chain, because if anyone in that chain is missing, guess whose fault it is? And it's painful because people are going to yell at each other because now they're all in the same room. When we did that end to end, I was assigned, you have to work with the manager from Canada. And I may not told you the story. I picked him up at the airport. This was my global wholesale representative in my IKEA team to minimize handling damages. Met him at the airport, and before hello, he looks at me and says, "Do you actually have something, or are you full of shit like everybody else?"
Good to see you too.
I was like, okay, why don't you just hang around here a bit and we take it from there. We ended up being the best buddies in that whole process over 3 years. He was one of those persons that didn't trust any kind of cross-functional global initiatives because of his experience. But the way I approached it was that you tell whatever you want to tell, whatever you're unhappy with, everything that didn't work in the past, bring it up and then we deal with it. And once you have those initial meetings where everybody is forced to spill everything they have on their chest, you come to the point where, are you done? Is there anything more you want to complain about before we start building value for the company? And whether that's UN or IKEA or a brand new company, this is so much easier if you do it from the beginning. Figure out what can go wrong in each of those different functions in supply chain, and especially in those interfaces where people are going to blame each other. And make sure people know that your job is not to be in charge of your thing. Your job is to manage your thing so that the next receiver of your product, service, input is happy. That's it. And if you do that all the way, and of course backwards also with reverse logistics, you're going to win. Your company is going to win.
Yeah. Since you've moved on from the UN, you're now doing consulting for all different types of companies. When you talk to mid-sized companies, founders, things like that, where do you see unnecessary complexity creeping in the fastest?
I think that the companies who didn't build this in from the beginning, they will realize that suddenly they've grown so big that now they have to write manuals. They have to catch up with all those definitions of processes they didn't do in the past. And now it's all over the place. So now you see that people are doing their own initiatives because there was no routine for it, so they figured out a way to do it anyway. You have 15, 20 different locations, everybody's doing it differently. And now you try to do some kind of greater good and apply one size fits all. And it doesn't fit anyone. It maybe fits the only yes sayer because he's new and he doesn't have any mandate or leverage in the organization. So I think that's one of the key reasons why it fails, because it comes in too late and it's done by people who are not on the floor or people who don't have the floor experience.
Are you saying that you shouldn't need an SOP because it's so simple and it's understood that way? Or is it more of a, let's document it, but let's just make sure that when we go from one site to two sites that we're picking up the same process?
It's definitely pro SOPs, definitely. Okay. But don't buy a system before you have designed your supply chain. Make sure that you have done all the necessary pen and paper work and you have your process in place before you let the system run your company. Because what happens is it's so disorganized, and I would say, well, we need someone who can help us. I'm 100% pro automate that with warehouse management systems, with any kind of flow systems for logistics, but not before you've done your homework with the processes.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And that's something that we see clients all the time as well. Is they're like, I have this problem, I'm going to go buy a software. And they what they don't want is software. What they really want is a genie, right? They want something that's going to come in and fix themselves and make them turn into IKEA, but they don't put the hard work in of understanding, here's what's actually happening, here's what I want to have happen, and then, how do we bridge the gap between the ideal state and the current state? When it comes to IKEA's approach to cost discipline and uncompromising quality, how does that actually look in practice?
If you take the triangle, cost, quality, time, IKEA never saw that as a compromise. Time has to give. We can never compromise on quality and we can never compromise on price. If we compromise on quality, we lose the credibility with the customers. If we compromise on price, we are not for the many people. So whatever time it takes, we're going to take that time to make sure that when we go to market, it's absolutely appreciated as a high value item. And this came about in the biggest way, I would say, in the beginning of the 90s, where IKEA was developing the board on frame solution, the same way you do doors to make shelves, tables, even sofas out of it. It took years to develop. And at the end, IKEA said, we spent so much in R&D on this thing, maybe we should have our own factory. At that time, IKEA didn't produce any of their own furniture. And this was the beginning to what now is IKEA Industry, which is the biggest furniture manufacturer in the world with more than 30 factories all over the world. To build in cost and quality conjointly from the beginning and let it take the time it needs. So I think that's how IKEA managed that portion of it. So quality was never a compromise between price and quality. It was the right quality at the right price.
Is that a luxury that only a big company can afford in terms of just letting it take its time?
Well, you need a war chest. You need to be able to have the money to sustain that R&D. So for a new company, unless you're funded properly, don't try to go and find the next great thing in terms of a brand new product. If you need to compromise on price or quality, you might have a high price, but maybe you target a wealthy consumer market, and that might be okay. But you absolutely need the capital and the war chest to be able to allow that R&D time.
Makes sense. It feels that IKEA finds a factory, sticks with them for a long time. And in the startup ecosystem, it feels that some brands are jumping around every 18 months to a new factory. What behaviors or what relationships really allowed for that continuity that smaller brands should think about adopting, even when they don't have the same leverage as IKEA?
Right. Trust. You have to build in trust from the beginning. So every year IKEA did the supplier survey, and every year it came back as demanding and honest, high score, very demanding, not always appreciated, but very demanding. And factories at the end accepted because, okay, you push us to learn, you push the envelope, you teach us to be more competitive in the production. That might help us for other clients also, so we're good with that. Always paying after 30 days, regardless. So there is no pressuring the supplier to sustain long periods of cash, lack of cash. Less good scores on fair and professional. The fairness sometimes because, well, competition comes, and yes, we worked together for 8 years, but sadly you are 12% too expensive. Let's work together and figure it out. But at the end of the day, if you're not competitive enough, we need to either draw down the volume or close business with you. Professional scoring less, probably because IKEA promotes people very early. And it's hard for new juniors to be professional of the get-go. Professionalism comes both from skill and talent, but it also comes from years of experience doing the same thing. So I think that that's why it scored lower. But it always came back to trust. And as a small company, you can build that in from the beginning. You don't try to promise them the world saying, we're going to buy hundreds of thousands of this item. You say, I have no idea how many we're going to buy. This is brand new. This is how well I worked my business plan. These are all the people I already contacted with in terms of customs, transportation, retail opportunities, online presence. And you are with me on this journey. We're going to work scenarios because I believe before anything else, the scenarios that you can build both in a lab environment and also sometimes in real life. That's how you build the basis of your business plan. And your vendor is part of your business. It's not anything external. Everyone you invite, just like inviting an employee or inviting a new manager, you invite the supplier to your ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, it's a circle of trust. It's transparent. You share the ups and downs, and you tell them if something goes wrong, you'll be the first one to know. And then if we have figured it out already in all these different risk mitigation scenarios that we built together with you, we apply one of those. If we haven't built it, well, we missed it, and then we build it now. And I think that trust with a vendor that you are going to commit and you're going to stick to what you commit with them, but you never promise what you can't commit to.
Yeah. Is trust earned or is it lost? How should a business be approaching that with a new relationship?
It's hard to earn and easy to lose. Most people won't buy you at face value. And not all suppliers in the world have great opinions about IKEA. They were rather squeezed out because of competition or there was a claim that the product description wasn't perfectly defined and the supplier had to take the blame. There might be stories like that. But most of the time, it's really something that is earned year after year after year. So one of the agreements I made with a big kitchen manufacturer in France, they said, okay, you force us to lower the price, force us. You very clearly tell us that we need to be more competitive. But how can we guarantee that the volume is going to come in there? What if the customer decide to buy something else? So we created a mechanism saying that this is the price decrease we need. Let's split it in two. We get half in the beginning of the year. And if we reach this volume goal after 6 months, you give us the other half. And that creates a mechanism that you don't have to renegotiate every year or every half year. And that one lasted, I think, 6 or 7 years. And it left the door open for new product development with certain criteria, thicknesses, production time, surface treatment, that within that frame, IKEA can come in with new items and it will still apply to the same principles in the agreement.
Yeah, I think there's so much that goes into just having a well thought through agreement. It always frustrates me a little bit when a company is just says, "Oh, a contract is just a PO with a little bit more legalese." I'm like, that is completely beside the point. You're framing up the relationship here.
You're absolutely right. And how many contracts? People come back and say, yes, we won the business. Okay, so where's the contract? Oh, we haven't spoken to legal yet. Why didn't you talk to legal before you went out? Okay, fine. And then you go through all those hoops with legal, with risk, with finance. You get the contract ready. You get it through. The last points are negotiated. And the contract goes into the drawer. It's like, no, this is the whole point. You just created the base for how you should collaborate over the next 3 to 5 years. You have to make that agreement a living reality. And you pull out those points, that same thing I said about the packaging instruction of 90 pages. You don't give the 90 pages and you flip them through one of your weekly or monthly follow-up meetings, but you pick out those 3 to 5 essential points that drives the business, and those are living realities. Those are in every single meeting the factory has. Those are in all the cross-functional supply chain meetings. You make that agreement a living reality.
Yeah, I agree. There's a couple of schools of thought when it comes to contracts. It's like, okay, let's figure out all the different ways that we can screw each other and how I'm going to prevent you from doing that. Like, that's one way of doing it. But I think a better way to do it is where you think, here's all the mechanisms we have, and what is it that you want, what is it that we want, and these negotiations are less about me beating you up or you beating me up. It's just more of a, let's run through scenarios like you talked about. Let's think about, if this happens, how would we react, and is that good for you guys, and how could we maybe get around the difficulty that's going to cause on your side. And there's just something about here where it's like the negotiation piece is not just the legal. It's not just getting something you can sign that canonizes the prices. It's really this investment of time, less in the legalese side, but more on the commercial side of, this is how we're going to work together when life happens.
Yes. It's I call it as a prenup. Agree on all the hard parts when you still love each other.
Yeah.
There's no point in doing that when you start to fight. It's too late. Then there's going to be mitigations and law firms involved, and everybody knows who is the one making money when that happens.
Yeah, I want to go back to kind of your scaling days at IKEA, because again, very different from the 90s to today. What actually changes when you start to grow and experience that kind of growth, and what surprisingly stays the same during that same period? 3
different takes on that. Planned and unplanned scaling.
Okay.
Forecasts are always wrong. That's not an idea, it's a fact. There's not one single forecast in the world that's correct. So why work with it? Nobody can predict exactly how much anything's going to sell. So we did a couple of things on that, both planned and unplanned. Let's go with the unplanned first. A few years ago, IKEA developed this vase, and I think it was sold in the stores for 99 cents or 149. It's like crazy.
Wow.
Pretty big, almost a foot high vase with a profit. And it was brought up in the product council. We think we're going to sell 1 million pieces. Okay, great. So then it was launched. I think it was even in the catalog. After 3 weeks of sales, the sales pace was 9 million pieces. So, of course, the people called me, you need to renegotiate the price. because the volume is 9 times higher. I said, okay. I went back to the vendor and said, if you pay 20% more, I can make sure to get you those 9 million pieces within a year. I said, what do you mean more? Well, you never told us it's going to be 9 million pieces. If you want 9 million pieces, I need to kick out this list of vendors or clients that gives me 3 times higher gross margin. How do you explain that to the board? How do you explain that to the owner? So that was an example of an unplanned scaling because you didn't do the scenario planning in the beginning. And it just hit you. And now either you're going to be out of stock or you have to pay more and either go with a loss or at least completely trash your expected gross margin. But if you haven't planned it, those are the options you have at that point because you cannot remove it. If it's out there and people know it's there, the credibility and the brand value is going to take a bigger hit than the extra cost and the reduced gross margin. So that's an unplanned situation. The planned one we did was a completely new take on bedrooms, worldwide supply of mattresses. So I said, okay, so how many are you going to sell? So we don't know. I said, I love that answer. Do you think you're going to sell more than last year? Oh, definitely. Last year was 1.5 million mattresses. Now it's going to be at least 2 or 3 million. Okay, let's do 2 million, 3 million. Do you think it's a chance you're going to sell 4 million? Maybe. Great. Let's put 4 million. And I think we added 5 million just for the hell of it. So now we had 4 scenarios, and each one of those 4 scenarios required completely different amount of raw cotton for the fabrics, different amount of capacity for the foam, different capacity for the wood, different capacity for each of these components, and a completely different supply matrix. But we pre-negotiated each of the 4 scenarios. If this happens, how quickly can you scale up or scale down production to meet scenario A, B, C, or D? So when that whole thing launched, and at the end I think it was about 2.7 million mattresses, we were very close to scenario B. So we pulled out that plan and alerted every single part of the supply chain because they knew it's going to be one of the 4. And it's going to be closest to one of them, not exactly one of them. Mm-hmm. And I think we ran for a good 2-3 years without any out of stock, except for the children's mattress.
Wow. And so were those all the same partners in each of the scenarios, or was it?
No.
Okay.
It was anywhere between, I think it was 7 to 12 suppliers.
Okay.
And all of them having different amounts of volume to produce.
Holger, we've talked so much about your experience with the UN and the simplicity you're driving, obviously scaling with IKEA. If you had to put yourselves in a founder's shoes today, what are the things that you need to be thinking about that really allow you to scale and build something that somebody else wants to buy one day?
Scenario planning. That's the best way to imagine a number of different potential realities. And you do it on paper, you do it in a lab environment, you bring in very few people and you play it out. You know, what if? You do all the what ifs that you can possibly imagine. And by doing that, when you want to sell your company, first of all, make sure you have your RACI charts, your process maps, and all that nailed down from the beginning. So as you grow, you adjust, but you don't restart. You don't have to redo it or do it for the first time. All that from the beginning. You have all your different scaling scenarios for which part of the SKUs is going to increase how much on what market. And also in those scenarios, you play with, what if I lose, what if people stop buying this? I have a 30% loss of revenue for 2 years. What war chest do I need to be able to sustain that period of time? And when you can, because if this is a running business and it's 1 million or 2 million or 5 million, you can actually go out and test those scenarios for real life. I was asked one question for the food people in US. So we don't have enough gross margin. What can we do? Because we want to scale, but we can't scale if we don't have a gross margin. It's okay. Let's go through the entire range and see what we can do. And I picked one bag of chips. It's a 1.1 ounce bag of chips, and they sold it at $1.29. And everybody knew that the 1 ounce chips bag is 99 cents. So not only did it not sell because it was too expensive, people knew 99 cents is the breaking point, but also they didn't make any money on it. So I said, why don't you sell it for 89 cents? So no, we're going to lose even more money. It's like, how many do you sell in a week? Well, 100. Great, I pay you the difference. I write the check, take the check, Really did that. So sell it in 2 stores for 2 weeks at 89 cents. Then one of the stores misunderstood and sold for 79 cents. Sales grew by 800%. So to make that one bag of chips, you need one of these. This is one potato. It's 3 times the weight, but 70% goes away with water in production. That's another thing with IKEA. Nobody gets hired with procurement if you don't know exactly how much the damn thing should cost. If you don't know what it should cost, how can you negotiate? You look at the price list and say, oh, you get 70% off. Doesn't matter, you were 90% too expensive. So with that 800%, it's like, okay, don't call the vendor. Don't call the factory. Go to them and say, what if we're going to increase sales? What are the breaking points for you in the production or in your purchase of potatoes from Idaho? What does it take for us in order for you to go down 10%, 15%, 20%, so forth? So this is what happened. You negotiated the scenarios with the vendor. You didn't tell them that you did a test for 2 weeks. But this, as a new founder or a business owner that has $1, $5, $10 million, whatever scenario you do on paper, see if there are portions of that you can test on a select geographical market, 2 stores, 1 week, 3 weeks, and you get fresh, raw information for how that scaling could look like if you move certain pieces in your output.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It reminds me of one of the first companies I worked at was Hubble Contacts. It was a direct-to-consumer contact lens company.
Mm-hmm.
And we had no idea how this was going to go. And we're meeting the factory, we're talking to them, we're like, well, if we maybe hit every green light, we're going to maybe sell 1 million lenses in the first year. And so we got to pray for that. And then I was like, what happens if we sold 5 or 10 or 20? And like, oh, well, here's the prices, go ahead. And that business, lucky enough, was such a smashing success that we raced up that piece there, and the prices were already locked in. And so I think they were kind of frustrated with themselves that they'd given away so much early on. But we went from the 1 million unit tier up to the 15 million tier in like 6 months or something like that. It was just this huge margin accretion because of that scenario planning you're talking about.
Of all these years, whatever, vast different organizations like UN or IKEA, or even smaller companies now working with machine vision for poor pallet detection, deviation, and things of that nature, it's still the same thing. You always come back to how do you prepare yourself? It's the same thing with the risk management portion. You need to map every single potential risk that might hit your supply chain. It's a great exercise. The worst thing that can happen is that you know your supply chain inside out. You can't outsource that portion. You have to know. Then you can't run everything yourself, but you need to have a grasp of what's going on, what could happen to every part of your supply chain, and what percentage impact it has on you.
Yeah. Holger, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being on. We've got 2 questions that we like to ask all of our guests on Build a Business Worth Buying. And so the first question is, what is the best example of a moat that you've seen another business build?
iPhone, Google search, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, things that really stick. You're not going to go and buy ice cream. I'm going to go and buy Ben & Jerry's ice cream. It's not necessarily the sourdough or the chunky monkey, whatever it is, but it has created a whole universe of a brand behind it. I was even going to throw in Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is a brand. Swifties, all the merch, everything that comes with it. That's a brilliant moat. And her new album is going to be a smash hit. I haven't heard the songs. I'm going to buy it because I know it's Taylor Swift labeled. And then I was thinking about, do we have moats within IKEA or moats within other retailers? And I was checking on that a little bit, and I don't think there are moats as such, but they promote a sense of concept, a sense of value. So if you take Costco's, the rotisserie chicken, $4.99, the chicken in itself is not a moat, but it promotes the Costco moat of membership, right?
Yeah.
The same thing with IKEA's hot dog, it's 50 cents. The hot dog is not a moat because you don't make much money on a 50-cent hot dog, but it enhances that this is value for money. and it goes into every fiber of the company. So those would be mine. iPhone, Ben & Jerry's, Taylor Swift, Google search, rotisserie chicken. Yeah.
No, I love that. We often have family outings when it's Dad's turn to cook, and we go to IKEA and we get meatballs, and they get to play in the Småland, and yeah, it's fun. This is great. All right, well, tack så mycket för att du är här. This was absolutely wonderful, and thank you all for tuning in and listening to hear what Holger has to say.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on Build a Business Worth Buying, brought to you by ISBA Consulting. I hope today's conversation gave you real insights into scaling smarter, selling better, and thinking like a strategic operator. If you found value in this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's building their own sellable business. Until next time, remember, the real win isn't just building a business, it's building one worth buying.